Is it okay for me to say I'm a bit hyped now? Is it all right to get a little excited now? These Into the Light update live streams that Bungie has been giving us have looked fantastic, and I feel like we don't really appreciate the full picture because we've broken these live stream ups into 3 separate parts, but nevertheless, there's so much great stuff here. I'm hopefully going to do my best to roughly summarize everything we've seen, and again, tie everything back into the bigger picture as a whole, and give a bit of my thoughts. So, first and foremost, the very first live stream that we saw for the Into the Light, a completely free update that we are getting starting April 9th, that's next week by the time this video goes out, is a new mode called Onslaught. It is a wave-based survival mode where you're going to defend a single point. Bungie has designed old Crucible maps to fit this new sort of mode where there's going to be hand-picked enemies in order to come in with little sub-objectives, but the main meat and potatoes of this is that it's a 50-wave mode where you're trying to hold out as long as you can, where rewards scale accordingly. There's an easier mode and then there's a harder mode, standard to most PvE type activities, and in this activity you get to see the Brave Arsenal, 12 new or reprised weapons that Bungie is bringing back with this update. These are iconic weapons. I'm talking things like the Luna's Howl, the Mountaintop, Hammerhead, Blast Furnace, all weapons that we have come to know and love, weapons that have become core parts of our arsenal within the Destiny 2 sphere, and including some weapons from raids that are currently active, which may seem odd to the player who's a veteran, but for somebody who maybe hasn't spent a dime on any of the Destiny's expansions, gives them an opportunity to play with some of these raid weapons for the first time, which again is really cool. Not to mention the Super Black shader, one of the most sought after shaders back in Destiny 1 and a highly demanded shader for Destiny 2 is coming back, an all black edgy hunter shader, so you know that every single hunter on the planet is going to be running this. There's going to be shiny, quote unquote shiny variants of these weapons where you can get a unique ornament for each of these weapons depending on what day and so on and so forth, including a Gift of Thunder for brand new players. The new player experience, if we can pause for a second, the new player experience is something that is a fantastic undertone throughout this entire stream that Bungie kind of barely touches on. They kind of like mention it, which we will talk about more later, but this brings so much life back into the game. The Gift of Thunder is a way for newer players to get up to the light level of the current activities with a set of armor and weapons so that they can somewhat compete. But let's keep going. In this Brave Arsenal, there's a handful of new perks that we either haven't seen before or perks that we don't have a non-sunset variant of, not to mention that they've been slightly balanced in order to attune for the sandbox that we are now in. There's even Grimoire cards, which didn't get touched on, that we talked about in a previous video. This nice new social space to explore with shacks and all of this new progression and stuff that we've seen with Destiny, again off of this free update that we're getting, just dropping down in the middle of the season before the final shape. But then we come into today's live stream, and today's live stream for me absolutely set me ablaze, not just because I am a hardcore PvP player and I love seeing some of these new maps, but more than that, just so many things. Like I said, Bungie just sort of offhandedly mentions that are just game changers. So first and foremost, we're seeing the Whisper mission and the 0 Hour mission, missions that allowed you to go hunt down the Whisper of the Worm and the Outbreak Perfected respectively. Both of these weapons seem like they're just on the edge of being viable once again, and now we're going to get crafted variants of these, of which we can acquire through these new missions, of which these new missions are now updated in order to scale with our new power level. They mentioned changing a couple things to make it replayable for the people who have done this a handful of times, or maybe far more than a handful of times back in the day, updating some of the mechanics in order to keep it interesting. So yep, you're probably gonna have to go look up another Dado or whoever you'd like to watch video on how to complete this thing, which is great because it needs to be a little shooken up in order to keep things interesting. But like I mentioned, craftable variants of these weapons with each of those perks that we saw in that craftable list to just look fantastic, like just really smart picks for these exotics. And then we get into the PvP side of things, and they showed off 3 new maps, one from Europa, one from Neomuna, and one inside of a pyramid ship, each with a different vibe, but very much feels like classic Bungie designs. Even so much so that some of the less savory types within the live stream chat were spamming that it looks like a Halo map, which we say that as if it's a bad thing, as if Halo wasn't one of the greatest FPS games of all time. Starting with the Europa map, we see a medium range with a couple longer lines of sight type map that has that fallen theme. This is all kind of in Aramis's Catch I'm loving the verticality of this map. I'm loving how it's just enough to keep the flow of combat going to where you can get inside those closer range spaces with like an SMG or a sidearm or a shotgun or a fusion rifle, but still have the option to flex out to medium to longer range to allow things like your sniper rifles, your scouts, your pulses to have a good time. This map, of all the ones that I've seen, seems like this is going to be my favorite. And then we jumped into the Neomuna map, which has this new aesthetic that we've seen, of course, on Neomuna, but is nowhere else present. All of these are brand new, of course, but nowhere present on any of their other Crucible maps. This feels, I've seen a lot of people make comparison to Ivory Towers. This whole map is set up in such a way that there's this big fight in the middle of this big open space with these areas sort of flanking through these tunnels when these smaller little cabanas fight over flags or ammo or whatnot. And then we come to the last map, which is by far the longest range map, but it feels like it avoided the traps of multiplex and disjunction of being just, well, we'll have to see to be certain, of course, but it seems like it's avoiding the problems of disjunction of being just one lane that everyone's focusing through. Instead, this feels more like it's going to play like a combat arena and not just this one single lane that everyone's going to slam their head into and spend a lot of the time running back. Again, all of this we're going to have to see when we actually get our hands on this stuff, but as it stands right now, the way these maps were shown looks like the flow of combat is going to be superb. Of course, I'm excited to just see any maps at all, but the stuff that we did get to see is excellent. But, and then right at the end, Bungie just, again, offhandedly mentions so many just gold tier changes that we're going to get, updates that we're going to get. First of all, they're updating the New Light experience to make it so that your friend who maybe hasn't played in a while can skip past all the boring beginner parts with Shah Han and get potentially straight into the action, even going so far as to allowing players to choose which of the 3 light-based subclasses they would like to focus on to start out with. So if they already have a particular playstyle, or if you have something that you would like to recommend to them, you can just say, hey, use Arc Warlock instead, or what have you. And then next, they mentioned a character change, something that we've seen kind of coming through the pipes for a while. If you made a Guardian that doesn't look the greatest, perhaps you made it as a joke, not expecting to fall in love with Destiny, or you weren't the greatest designer when it was 10 years ago, you can now go back through and update some of this stuff. You can also change your name. So if you have something that you'd like to go through and update, boom. And again, all for free. At the very last bit, potentially, possibly, the biggest thing besides literally everything else we have seen so far is a sort of boss gauntlet, like a boss rush mode for all of the raid bosses in the game that Bungie explicitly mentioned that yes, raid loot will still be available, meaning that if you are trying to get some of those exotic weapons, such as myself, and they have yet to drop because your RNG is terrible, you now have the option to do so. And just that as a mode, like seeing which team can speed run the boss rush mode by itself sounds like such a cool way of taking the stuff that we already have within Destiny and arranging them in a way that feels way more player friendly. All of the changes that we have seen so far, the only small exception that Bungie has already backpedaled on, that being the time gating on some of the weapons for the Brave Arsenal, have all seemed very fun forward and player forward. I'm loving this. It seems that Bungie is hungry again. It's frustrating that Bungie had to get to this point in order to pull up on the reins this hard, but you know what? I'm happy that we are here. Bungie, I am so glad you're back in the kitchen and cooking. The good faith bank is slowly being deposited into again. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. As you can tell from my inflection, I am so freaking hyped for this. This looks like so much fun. I am so glad to see Bungie back in full swing. But of course, let me know with either a like, comment, or sub. Bless your faces. Deuces.